So Putin basically, he won. He got everything he needed out of that whole thing. And whether they're talking sternly or talking nicely, the only thing that matters in the world is what you do. And words are cheap, actions mean everything. And the actions here tell us that the Donald Trump, for reasons that we may never know, has decided to effectively, at least at this stage of the game, do nothing to force Putin to stop his murderous attack on Ukraine.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today, I'm joined by Sir Bill Browder. Bill, thank you for joining the Trump Report again.
Great to be here.
Good to have you back. I think we haven't seen you in a short time, and obviously there's so much news developing when it comes to this relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin and getting a peace deal over the line. What we've seen over the last week is that Donald Trump had called Vladimir Putin to see if he was interested in a meeting with President Zelensky after the Alaska summit. He said that he was maybe willing, and then we've basically heard nothing since. 10 days later, here we are. We have no plans in place for this meeting to occur, even though Trump said that it would likely take place within a 2-week period. Now we're seeing that Putin is reluctant to go to the meeting in any way. And the reason being, Trump said yesterday to reporters, is because he simply does not like Zelensky. So your reaction to that?
Well, Putin never had any intention of going to any meeting. It's all been what I call KGB rope-a-dope. He throws stuff out to Trump to try to give him something. But Putin doesn't want to end the war. He doesn't want to meet with Zelensky. He doesn't want to compromise on any positions. And all he wants to do is just keep Trump off his back. He wants to avoid any kind of sanctions. And he's accomplished all of that. The war carries on. There are no secondary oil sanctions. There's no meeting. And he can do what he wants. And that's what Putin's objective has been from the very get-go.
Trump also said that every conversation I have with Vladimir Putin is a good conversation, that unfortunately a bomb is loaded up in Kyiv or someplace, and I get very angry about it. I mean, Bill, this is obviously war, what's happening right now, and Putin has made it very clear that he isn't willing to cooperate with the West and will continue his attacks. So I'm confused as to why he would say something like this.
Well, Trump was busy saying all over and over and over again that this would have never happened if he was president. Well, he's now president, and Putin is dramatically accelerating the bombing of innocent targets in Ukraine. If you look at the number of drones launched from Russia into Ukraine since Trump was president, it's increased exponentially. And so Trump really needs to do something about that. And all this nonsense about deadlines that pass and so on it certainly isn't working. It's only making Putin more encouraged to execute his war.
He told reporters yesterday that he was getting angry at Putin and that he had another phone conversation with the Russian leader since the Alaska summit. But Bill, how convinced are you that Donald Trump is actually getting angry at Vladimir Putin behind closed doors? Now, the reason why I'm asking that is because we've obviously seen the takeaway from the Alaska summit was that no one really thought that Trump was very hard on Putin. He obviously never mentioned a ceasefire, after claiming that there would be severe consequences for Putin if there was no ceasefire. But, this video went viral, this old video of Bill Clinton talking about how sometimes the right way to go about it with adversaries is to be firm in these private meetings, but to the public not talk badly about them in order to, I guess, not piss them off. So are you convinced that Trump would be stern on him and vocalizes his anger towards Putin in these phone conversations?
I don't know what's happening in these phone conversations. All I know is what's happening in the real world. And what's happening in the real world is that Donald Trump has made, since he has taken on his second term as president, he's made 6 ultimatums to Putin to cease fire, to come to the table, to have a real negotiation. And each one of these ultimatums has come and gone without any consequences. And the most recent one, of course, was leading up to the Anchorage, Alaska summit. He said that if Putin didn't agree a ceasefire, he would impose secondary sanctions on all people who bought Russian oil, the Chinese, the Indians, the Turks, and others. And the effect of that would have been to get them to stop. They would have stopped buying Russian oil. If they stopped buying Russian oil, Putin would probably be out of business in 6 months and have to stop the war. But the summit came, they had a meeting, and somehow the result of that meeting was that there was no longer a requirement for Russia to cease fire, and there were no imposition of secondary sanctions on people who buy Russian oil. And so Putin basically, he won. He got everything he needed out of that whole thing. And whether they're talking sternly or talking nicely, the only thing that matters in the world is what you do. And words are cheap, actions mean everything. And the actions here tell us that the Donald Trump, for reasons that we may never know, has decided to effectively, at least at this stage of the game, do nothing to force Putin to stop his murderous attack on Ukraine.
He was asked on Monday, Bill, what would happen if no meeting was agreed to. Trump said that there could be very big consequences, and we'll see what happens. There might be very big consequences because this is something that needs to end. Now, we've obviously heard this song before, as you mentioned, 6 ultimatums, but do you believe that sanctions are even on the table from the Trump administration still?
No, he's already articulated that he has no intention of imposing sanctions. He said, in quotes, that would be counterproductive for bringing Russia to the table. And so, of course, there are not going to be sanctions. But having said all that, there is one place where there are sanctions. I'm sure you're going to want to talk about this some more, which is that Ukraine is imposing its own sanctions on Russia. Ukraine has been very effectively launching a campaign of drone attacks on the Russian oil refinery infrastructure. And as of today, 17% of Russia's oil refining capacity is no longer in working condition because it's been destroyed. And so as a result of that, there are now terrible fuel shortages in different parts of Russia. The price of gasoline has gone up, and Russian people are feeling very strongly the effect of real sanctions imposed by Ukraine, not by the United States or anyone else.
And we'll get into that because, Bill, I don't want to speculate the method behind the Ukrainian army's tactics here, but what you could look at it and think that basically the Ukrainian army was so sick of the threats of sanctions that took matters into their own hands, which was quite literally targeting Russian oil refineries, which you and I have spoken about at great length, is, of course, what is funding this war. Now, you mentioned parts of Russia. There's a lot of oil rationing going on over in Far East Russia, parts of the Kuril Islands. Fuel has been temporarily suspended in that entire area, all linked to refinery outages following these Ukrainian strikes. And now it's 13 to 17% of Russia's oil refinery capacity has been completely lost. Now, this quote went viral on Telegram. It was the mayor of the Kuril district. He basically said, for residents of the Kuril district, the sale of A192 gasoline has been temporarily suspended. The existing fuel stock is fully reserved for servicing special transport. A new batch of gasoline is expected to arrive today, after which residents will once again be able to purchase fuel. We will inform you as soon as sales resume. So, in parts of Russia, Far Eastern Russia, Bill, there is no fuel for days on end.
Yeah, well, I mean, it really is, bringing home the war to these people. Having said that, if you were to watch Russian television, they don't mention that the reason why there's no fuel is because of Ukrainian drone attacks. What they tell the people has to do with the harvest or other issues, but they're not leveling with the people that this is, the Putin's, quote, special military operation coming to their doorstep. I think at some point people probably know or will know as this thing gets worse. And by the way, the Ukrainians are not done with this. They're just getting started. And one of the reasons why you're seeing this happening now is that the United States has basically told the Ukrainians that they couldn't use any U.S. missiles to strike targets inside of Russia. And they also said that they couldn't use UK Storm Shadow missiles using U.S. guidance information to hit Russian targets. But with Trump basically cutting off supply of weapons, at this point, the Ukrainians can use their own resources and don't have to hold back, and that's what they're doing. And the Ukrainians have come up with their own long-range missile. It's called the Flamingo. It can go 3,000 kilometers. It's not quite as good as the ATACMS missiles, which the U.S. provided, or the Storm Shadow missiles that the U.K. provided, but it's a pretty good substitute, and they can hit all sorts of energy targets inside of Russia, and I suspect that we're going to see a lot more than just the 17% being knocked out.
Well, it's clear that this tactic is working, Bill, but because we see such a lull in the progress of getting a diplomatic peace deal between the US, Europe, and Russia and Ukraine, is it, and of course the fact that Congress is still on recess, so we can't see Lindsey Graham's bill being put to the Senate floor, but should we as Europeans or members of NATO be giving Ukraine more weapons in the meantime to continue their attacks on these oil refineries? I know that, of course, that they're using their own artillery to the best of their ability, but why not help them out a bit more?
Well, we are, and when I say we, I mean the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada. Canada just allocated $1 billion to military aid to Ukraine. The Norwegians just allocated $8 billion. The Germans, 10 billion euros. And so real money is going to Ukraine from Europe. And by the way, when that money runs out, I suspect and I predict that Europe will start to seize the frozen Russian assets held in Europe to fund the war in Ukraine. If Donald Trump decides that it's not in his interest to carry on doing this, we the rest of the world have to carry on doing this, and we have to find a way to make it happen. And the frozen Russian assets is one of the most obvious ways of making that happen.
Bill, Trump, he also said that if we get to the end of this week, which would mark the 2 weeks since the Alaska summit, and there's no progress, there's no meeting in place between Zelensky and Putin, then he would have to try a different tact. Now, do you think that means that diplomacy is over from the US side, or that Donald Trump actually might tap out?
It's like the boy who cried wolf. I mean, I don't have any confidence whatsoever in his threats because he doesn't follow through. Of course, the famous TACO acronym, Trump always chickens out. I don't see any reason why his threat the seventh time around is more meaningful than the sixth, fifth, or fourth. And so I think we should just pretty much put him to the side and come to the conclusion, which has been kind of obvious since the very beginning, that he kind of wants to side with Russia on this whole thing. I think he's prevented from doing it by the American people, by the Republican Congress, by various other factors, but he's not on Ukraine's side by any means, and I think we should just accept that and move on with that as the operating assumption.
Well, do you think that we can trust Trump and his administration when it comes to security guarantees for Ukraine, Bill? Because at least he keeps mentioning that, and that to me, I wonder if that indicates that he is serious about that.
I think you can't trust the United States on security guarantees. Even before Trump, the United States gave a security guarantee to the Ukrainians. It was signed by Bill Clinton in 1994. It was called the Budapest Memorandum. At that moment in time, the United States wanted to have Ukraine give up their nuclear weapons. And an agreement was signed with the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia that if they gave up their nuclear weapons, that their territorial integrity would be protected. They gave up their nuclear weapons, and then here we are in 2022. Russia launches their full-scale invasion, and what does the U.S., UK do? They provide some support, but they don't get involved in protecting Ukraine's territorial integrity. And so now you have Trump, who's all over the place, who makes a promise one day, breaks it the next. I don't think that any security guarantees provided by the United States would be worth the paper they're printed on.
Well, I want to read out a few things that Sergei Lavrov said in his interview with NBC, which aired over the weekend. He said, when it comes to the stage of signing documents, we would need a very clear and understanding by everybody that the person who is signing is legitimate, and Mr. Zelensky is not at the moment. He basically said Russia can't sign a peace deal with Ukraine if President Zelensky is the legitimate president, referring to him as the de facto head of the Ukrainian regime. Bill, obviously we know that a peace deal right now seems so far-fetched, but Your reaction to the fact that this is the rhetoric he's still spitting out, that Volodymyr Zelensky is not the legitimate leader of Ukraine?
Well, so the Russians can be criticized for just about everything except for one thing. They've been totally transparent since the beginning of the war of what their intentions are, and they have not been in any way misleading. They've said very clearly that Ukraine shouldn't be a sovereign state, that Zelensky is not a legitimate leader, that it should be all part of Russia, and their goals are a complete takeover of Ukraine. That's what they've said, and they haven't altered that. And he's just being honest and consistent with everything that they've said before. And so I don't think that all these discussions that everyone's having about a peace deal and then peacekeeping forces is just putting the cart before the horse in a major way. Russia has no intention of doing any of that kind of stuff. And the only way to end this war, it's very simple. Putin started this war. If he wanted to end it, he could end it today. He doesn't want to end it. And so the only way to end it is for the Ukrainians is either to capitulate, which is a terrible outcome, and just unbelievably terrible things would happen if they did that, or to continue fighting it and winning it. And that's what they intend to do. And it's not impossible for the Ukrainians to win this war. If you look at the Taliban, won 2 wars, once against the Soviets and once against the Americans. And the Ukrainians are 100 times better than the Taliban in terms of fighting the Russians. And all these things that they've done militarily are genius. Knocking out the third of the long-range bombers, to take out 17% of the oil refineries, to knock out the Black Sea fleet of the Russian Navy. For a country that's literally 1/10 the size of Russia when it comes to economic and military might, they've done a very good job, and they could continue to do a good job, and they could probably put Putin in a position where he has no choice but to negotiate. But to do that, they need more weapons, and they need to tie up Russia's oil money and other forms of economic activity so that Putin can't afford the war. And if Putin is in a position where he's losing, and he's in a position where he doesn't have any money, then there will be a real negotiation. But up until then, all this fantasy about we want peace. You can't have peace if the invading country doesn't want to stop invading.
Absolutely, you're so right. A negotiation can't begin until he's got more to lose. But you have Lavrov going on air saying that Zelensky has said no to everything. How can we meet with a person who is pretending to be a leader and denied targeting civilians in Russian strikes? But Bill, I want to read out a few. Now, obviously, J.D. Vance is quite a scandalous character when it comes to this war, but he's back at it. He said he respected Zelensky. He said he told him to behave, which was an odd thing to say to someone who's visiting D.C. to ask for help. But J.D. Vance, he said in his NBC interview, he said, "I think the Russians have made significant concessions to President Trump for the first time in 3.5 years of this conflict. They've actually been willing to be flexible on some of their core demands. They've talked about what would be necessary to end the war. Of course, they haven't been completely there yet, or the war would be over, but we're engaging in this diplomatic process in good faith." Now, what concessions is he talking about?
There have been no concessions. And again, Putin has been very transparent. He's not made any concessions whatsoever. And it's a fantasy to think that there's any concessions that have been made at all. There's no concessions. And so it's just used car salesman talk to say that. There's no basis for it whatsoever. Putin has said he wants the whole thing. All this talk going into the Anchorage, Alaska summit of taking Donbass and giving this and so on, that's not what Putin agreed to, nor would he agree to that. He wants all of Ukraine, the whole thing. He doesn't want Zelensky to be president. He wants a Russian puppet. He doesn't want Ukraine to be a sovereign, independent sovereign state. He wants it to be part of Russia. They have this word, the root causes of the war. That's what they're always talking about. And what the root causes of the war are is that Ukraine exists as a independent state, a country. That's the root cause of the war that they have to get rid of in order to declare peace. And the Ukraine doesn't want to, and the Ukrainian people don't want to become slaves to the Russians. They don't want to have the women raped, the men tortured and murdered, and the children kidnapped, as the Ukrainians saw what happened when Bucha and other places were occupied briefly after the full-scale invasion. The Ukrainians know what becoming a sort of subjugated state looks like, and they would rather fight a long war than give themselves up to that type of horror, that hell that Putin would subject them to if they lost this war.
How do you think J.D. Vance makes the Trump administration look when he says things like that Russia is making concessions, even though we've seen Lavrov literally come out and say that they wouldn't sign any sort of peace deal if Zelensky was the leader? And this, of course, happened after the fact that Donald Trump, finished the Alaska summit with a lot of people breathing down his neck saying, what credibility lost after coming out of that meeting, not even getting a ceasefire, as you said you would, or even mentioning it, to say the least, and then rolling out the red carpet for a war criminal bill.
Well, I think that J.D. Vance's only job is to support Donald Trump's policy. Donald Trump, for reasons that we don't know yet, has effectively said he prefers Putin to Zelensky. And whatever Donald Trump does on a day-to-day basis to further that sentiment, which he did in Alaska and has done at the United Nations, voting with Russia on various things, cutting off military aid. That's Donald Trump's policy. J.D. Vance is just supporting that policy, and he'll say whatever he has to say to support that policy.
So, Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you.